So today I'm going to study GSAP, which is a library that helps you animate stuff. And from what I've seen, you can animate things on 3GS. And I remember seeing this library before, and I think I forgot about it. But then I saw somewhere again, and I think it's just better to use this library instead of trying to create my own thing. But I think I'm going to study the library. I want to study the source code. And I'm going to start by trying to implement stuff here. And also the other thing that I realized since last stream is that there are a lot of situations where the animations and the events are going to be linked. So I think that I have to do the same logic for both of them, which is going to be to make it so that the component receives the props, which are in the events that I'm thinking about passing an object. Actually, I am going to pass an object. I think I already decided that because of the way that I structure things here. And then the object is going to contain the key value pairs, which is going to be the type of event and the function that is going to trigger. And then here I created this functions with use callback, which remembers the definition of the function. And you can pass the dependency array to tell it when it needs to update the definition. So whenever one of these values changes, it's going to change the function so that the new values, so the function is called with the new values again. So pretty much what I'm doing is just passing an object that has the functions, and then if the thing has the function, it's going to attach the event listener to that, which is just going to be calling the function. And what that allows me to do is just to have flexibility on the stuff that I want to happen. So the way that I'm thinking about building things is that I'm gonna do that right now. Just create a folder that has I created this file here because I wanted to do, like, for understanding and learning the animations. I think the first thing that I'm gonna try to do is animate because the way that I'm thinking about it is animating certain paths on the graph. I think that's gonna be very useful. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is probably try to change the color of the node and edge sequentially one by one in the order of the node IDs. So I'm probably just gonna loop through the node IDs, then switch the colors back and forth. So I'm gonna have to think about that now. I think initially I'm gonna use GSAP, and then maybe I'll study the source code and try to incorporate the logic from my own code, like change their code and then use my own code, but I'm not really sure if it's worth it. Just spend the time. And as I'm doing all of this, I finished the course for operational systems, and I think I'm gonna go back to the other one about the compilers. And I'm going to right after this, I'm going to see if I can start building the interpreters and compilers. I'm gonna put some music and let me start doing this stuff. I don't think I'm gonna spend a lot of time here today. So I think I can put... Oh, the other thing that I have to do is create another component. And what I'm thinking about doing is searching for a library that does the component already, which I think is very likely that there is a library for that, which is going to be the player. So I want to see if I can get some source code somewhere that has a component that is a player, like a video player, and then I modify the video player to play the animation instead. So what can be the name of this file, this folder? I think I'm gonna create a folder, and then I'm just gonna put animations and events, and then each one is gonna have a bunch of different functions for animations, because the way that I'm thinking about structuring things in my mind is that also I'm gonna have to see if I can find where or how to build an IDE-like thing. And this is what I'm thinking about doing, is like building an IDE structure, like exactly like this one that VS Code has, but in the browser. And I know they have a version in the browser as well, but I'm not really sure if there's anywhere that I can find code that is going to help me structure that. But the way that I'm thinking about it is just like each graph, I want to have the ability to not only change the graph based on the inputs here. So I'm gonna create several different tabs, and each tab is gonna have the like specific things. And this is the other thing I'm thinking about. Once I do that, I'm gonna change probably the configuration component, which is the component that changes the physics and all of this stuff, and I'm gonna put here. And then I'm gonna create other tabs that allow you not only to change the type of graph. So for example, you can select the amount of nodes that you're gonna display, or like create different graphs from the original graph. I think that would be very nice. The other thing would be to like create several different tabs, or one tab that has several different configurations on different types of animations that you can do. And then obviously it's better if I create like a templates of animations and events, because then I can just swap them depending on the graph. And then I don't have to do the work again. So I think over time it's just gonna become like a series of templates for animations and events that are helpful for most graphs. And then I'm just gonna create the customization there. But there's a lot of work to do still, so I might change my mind obviously as well the more I do this thing. So what can be the name? Names are always hard because there's so many, especially with the nodes and the graphs, there's so many different things that, like for example nodes or edges, that I want to put the same name everywhere, but it's gonna get confusing. So it gets hard to, and it seems like a stupid thing because it's just names, but it is actually kind of hard to think about it. The other thing I have to decide now is what arguments I'm gonna pass here, because if since the function is gonna work as a template, I don't want to pass like too many arguments that none of the functions are gonna use, but at the same time I have to, like the minimum amount of arguments is gonna be the arguments that at least some animation is gonna require, which I think is gonna be like some stuff with the camera as well. I'm gonna have to pass here. So maybe I should try that first as well, because other idea is to, as you're animating, the camera moves from node to node, and I have a function that does that when I click or when I press the arrow keys. So I think I'm gonna reuse that function, but I don't remember like what the function requires, what kind of arguments. I guess I can pass a boolean variable, because I think that function only requires the node ID. So I can pass a boolean, and then with the boolean I determine whether or not to call the function. I'll look at that later. Let me think about the other stuff first. Maybe animations, events. Maybe it's better if I separate them into different folders actually. The thing is, like, I think it's better to create one folder that has both of them, because I think a lot of them are gonna use each other, obviously. So like the events are gonna use the animations. Actually, only the events are gonna use the animations. So maybe I should just put events and then another folder called animations. Because I think the events are not gonna be... Yeah, I think the best way is probably to structure based on... So, I think I'm gonna do like that, events, and then I put animations here. And then I create each file here inside of the events to represent an event, so... I think that's very intuitive. And then on each one of these files, obviously I'm gonna have like several different functions that create different functionality depending on what I want to happen. The other tricky thing, the other thing that I have to do is actually figure out how to, because here on the function I'm receiving, because I did this once very quick to build a toy version of the stuff, the hardware here. I didn't even think about optimizing or anything like that. I just wanted to build like very quickly. So I think here, instead of receiving nodes, it's better to probably... Maybe I should also receive nodes as well, because it is going to be useful, I think, in some situations. But I think I need to add pass node meshes, like sphere meshes, pretty much all the graphics that the visualization is using. Because one thing that I want to do is add the ability to navigate the page when you click the node, the labels. Which is another annoying thing. I have to separate the labels. And there was some stuff that I don't remember really well, but there were some problems, like as I was thinking about that, because here, the way that the selection works, I think that's kind of annoying. Because the selected object is not exactly the object that I have on the node itself. It's like is a different way that it captures the objects. So you have to access differently there. I think this is the biggest problem. Because the reason why I use the raycaster is because it's on 3D, so I think that what the raycaster does is it shoots kind of like a light ray or something like that in order to see if it hits an object or not. And that's how it determines whether or not the object was selected. But the issue is you can only pass meshes here, you can pass the normal objects. So the problem is if I pass the label meshes, how do I attach the event? I think I need to create a link between the two. So I'm probably gonna have to create another property on the labels that connects the, probably label ID, connects the label with the mesh. Because I have to put the link on the label itself, I think. Yeah, I have to create an HTML element. Maybe not. Let me think about this. Yeah, the question is, how do I... I'm probably gonna have to search how to get the... How to navigate only using the URL. Or some object from the window. Because inside of the label mesh is inside of the canvas, and inside of the canvas it doesn't accept HTML. Unless I use a React Ray element, which I don't want to use. So the question is, how do you pass the link to the thing so that when it clicks, it navigates to the thing? I think I'll think about that later. So I think I'm gonna start with the click events. Oh, the problem is the... So maybe I should create another file here. Oh, should I call the like index.js, or should I... Because the thing is, I'm gonna create the object, but the problem is if I... Maybe I can create that function that doesn't have anything. Like, I'm gonna pass the object here instead of the functions themselves. So I'm thinking about importing everything on this one. And then, like, the issue is when I don't want to use certain functions, if I can pass just an empty thing. The problem is this, is that there's going to be several different functions as well. So this is an issue. Because I can't put the standard ones here. So maybe the events I'm going to have to create on each page that I do. Or I'm going to have to create another function here. Which one is better? So I can create a function that receives a bunch of arguments and then loops through the arguments. And matches the whatever events I pass. And puts them there. The other question is whether or not to nest events. If I can do that. So let's say I have two different click event functions. And instead of passing the only one, I find a way to... Like, how do I compose the two different ones into a single function? I think I'll think about that later when I delete this file. I'm just gonna create the events here now, and I'm gonna start with the click event. And for now, I'm gonna do it here. So the way that I was doing before is just calling a function, and then I put all the events and the nodes and edges inside of the function. But now, and then I set them here with the state. I think I didn't do the state here. I remember that I did something. Yeah, here. So I'm using this one to pass here, which is an object that has the things there. So instead of passing this, let's create an object. And then inside of here, I pass the animation and the events. And then I can create an event here. Obviously, it's not ideal, but I think I'll figure out the details later. I also think I have to get into the habit of just building this stuff first and then thinking about how to optimize later. Otherwise, I get too much into paralysis by analysis. So, let me think. When I import, I wanna see how I did on the other one. So that I think it's on graphs. Yeah, click events. I think animation is just gonna be a function. It's not gonna be an object. And the events is gonna be an object. And the question is how I'm gonna separate the animations into files. I think I'm just gonna create... I have to spend time thinking about this stuff. But it's probably better to do what I said now, which is just to try to build like the first thing. And then once I build it... Because the biggest challenge is that it really depends on the structure of the graph. And I think that's gonna vary a lot because I think I'm just gonna create animation example for now. Or example. I'll be right back. So I think one thing that I have to do is to search for the examples on how to use GSAP with 3JS, because I need to put inside of the use frame, I think. So I think I need to create a condition here. Maybe I already did this. No. As I think this is what I was. I think I did this, but then I deleted because I have to do it based on the store, I think. So I need to create a value. I think I need to create a store first, the store first. That is gonna be different, and then I have to pass as props probably. So I need to create another store here. Because I need to create a flag variable that is gonna indicate whether or not the animation is on. So or maybe I'll do like I did with this one. I think I'm gonna create the store first, and I'm not gonna pass as props the variable that indicates whether or not the animation is on. I'm just gonna create on the store. So I'm just gonna create the store first. And then on the store, I'm gonna set a variable here. And this variable is gonna indicate whether or not the thing is active. And here I probably should accept some arguments. Thing is, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to, like, the function of the animation doesn't make sense to pass as an argument here, because it doesn't have. I'm not gonna have. I guess this is a problem. I think I can do it in the same way that I did the events, which I create a use callback function, and then based on the use callback function, I set make some variables based on the store. So instead of being the thing, yeah, but let me think. Because the question is whether or not the animation function is going to depend on variables. I think it is because of the way that GSAP is going to work. So the component is going to be for moving steps on the animation or for playing and stopping the animation. And I think that those things are going to be related to some arguments of the animation, because I want to make the animation dependent on like the controls. So the question is, how do I put them together? Because the controls are going to depend on the store, but the animation function is coming from the props. So maybe it is better to pass as an object instead of passing the function. What can I do? Let me think. I think let me finish creating this stuff here. Just copying and pasting. I think I'm gonna remove for now, then I'll think about it. The best way is to create the animation first. So I'm thinking whether or not I need to figure this out before creating the animation. But I think I don't need to. So let me set up the store, then I put the value there. So what these ones have. I think I'm gonna put inside of this one. See if this one solves. Okay. I don't understand why. Oh, it's animations. So why is not working? I'll get animation events. Okay. So I think the first thing that I have to do is put the function there, like pass as props, put the function. Actually, I'm gonna get from this one, so just copy the same stuff that I did for the other ones. The tricky thing about this one as well is that I'm not really sure like at what point to put the animation. I think it would be probably better if I put it inside of the camera controls here, because the changing the rotation of the label, I did it on this one, this use frame. And I think since the animation is gonna have some functions, it's probably gonna be better to pass here. So I think I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna create the animation here instead of on the other one. It just makes more sense. Some of them are gonna, but the issue is, what about the events? Like if I wanna click a node and then I wanna move the camera after clicking the node. But I guess it's the same thing. Like I just receive as an argument in the function. So maybe it's better to put it on the other, or maybe it's better to move the events to this one instead. The other thing I have to figure out is the arrows. I already set up everything based on a flag variable that is directed. So, but I didn't fix because the problem with the arrows is updating the positions with the physics engine. And also getting the position right. Let me think. The function that I'm using to move the things is this one. So like when I use the arrows here, it just navigates the nodes based on the ID. And then I'm using ref, I think, to track the index of each one, and I'm calling this one, which I found from the other library, which is use center graph. But the thing is, this one only receives like, it receives the ID of the node and this. Or it receives the camera. Let me think about this. So these values I think are accessible in the other one, but then it gets more annoying, I think, to do it. So this is the node ID, and this one I think is the component here that creates the camera. But I think the one that I have access on the other one is for the is from 3GS, which are different cameras. This one is the camera controls, which comes from another library, and the other one is from 3GS, the camera from 3GS. So I think it is gonna be more annoying because I don't have, like, I think I can have access on this component for the camera that is using there. Is gonna be like more work to figure out. So and I think it's better from an organization point of view as well to create everything here, because it's already setting up a bunch of events here as well. And if I wanna activate some stuff inside of the other events, I can just pass the same functions. Yeah, maybe I can do that. The biggest question that I have, what I'm thinking about now is like creating objects, and then each object is going to contain options for each kind of a thing. So, for example, on the click event, I'm going to receive an argument that has an object that is like specific events or something like that, or additional events. And then that object contains key mappings of the functions that are going to be triggered. So, for example, let's say I want to pass all these functions here inside of the click event function, so that at some point during the logic, these other functions are called. So I can pass as an object, and then I map the object to which thing that it is, and then inside of the function I can just call these other functions. It gets very complicated, I think. But then obviously it's also not very good if I pass just a bunch of objects, a bunch of options for each function. So I think it's better to pass as an object. And the more I build this, like, the more tricky it becomes, because I have the feeling of, like, and I have the experience of trying to understand other libraries, and I know how hard it is when there's all like this different stuff nested together all over the place. So like my concern is that if I do, I want to avoid to do these things as much as possible, because then from the point of view of someone that doesn't understand what I'm doing, like how easy it's gonna be for them to understand what's going on. And the other issue is with that is the state, because like obviously here is working the way that I'm doing, but I think it's not very good because I'm initializing this stuff here outside. So and this stuff outside only happens on the render phase of the component. And when you use the use effect and use state, it refreshes everything on the every time it mounts. But obviously I can use the use memo here to memorize the value. But yeah, I'm not sure if that's... The good thing about the use memo is that you can pass the dependency callback, which is gonna update every time that there's a change on the thing. So I think I can do that probably here. Like I can create options that are based on the use memo thing, and then for each thing I pass a bunch of different things. The key issue is always like the fundamental stuff that I talked about the previous stream, which is figuring out the balance between, because based on the way that I'm doing things, it forces me to have a template that is going to work for a variety of different things, and that's going to make me lose flexibility, because every function is going to have to receive the same arguments. So the question is, how do I make it so that depending on the situation it doesn't make it a lot worse? Because let's say if the function is only gonna use one argument, but I'm passing like 10 different arguments, so it's a waste of memory, I think. So if I pass it as an object, I think that... But then the problem is I'm gonna have to structure the object anyway. So I think the object doesn't change anything when it comes to memory. It would just change based on the... like how easy... or the visualization of passing the thing. I think the first thing I'm gonna do is just move the events that I did there for the click. For the events that I'm receiving as props, I'm gonna pass it through the camera controls, instead of doing it at this level. I think it's this one. I think I did it on this one because this drag... The other thing that I realized as I was doing this is that like the drag event is the most annoying one, I think, because it's the one that requires like the most information, I think. But maybe other events will like require the same as well. It's just that I already did, like, it's very annoying to figure out the position of the mouse and that kind of stuff. And I already had the drag event working, so I didn't want to spend a bunch of energy like trying to figure out how to make it so that I put this outside. So the way that I thought about it is just creating a control. Like, the other problem with the drag event is that it interferes with the other events. So if I want to set up an animation every time that I click the button, if the drag event is active, it might fuck up the thing. So what I did is just create another option on the other configurator, and then allows people to have the flexibility of turning the drag on and off. Yeah, here I have the access to the controls as well. But I think it does make more sense to pass this stuff to the other one. I can use this that I'm using for this one. I just realized this now, which is like, these controls here are the same one as the raft there. It's just the element that handles the controls. So I can pass this through the animation if I want the camera to move, and then I can do the same thing. But I remember I was having some issues with this, I think. I think I was having some issues with this when I was trying to do this thing here. But this is from the use tree thing. So which one should I do? Pass everything to this one, or leave on the other one? I think I'm gonna leave. The other thing is that for moving the camera, it would be better if I just... Maybe I'll do the animation here first, then I'll think about if I move the other ones. And I have to change this one as well. She was from the previous thing. Maybe I'll... I think I'm gonna do that now. Like, remove the other one, and then I'll focus on the other stuff. Because otherwise I'm just gonna keep delaying removing this. So I have to remove this one, and it's gonna be true by default, I think. And it's just true. Because otherwise I'm gonna get confused about... And this was just used to rotate the camera automatically based on some options, but I don't think it's very useful. But I do think that the events, for the same reasons that I'm using the thing here, is gonna be easier to just... Because then I can pass the function instead of creating the functionality again. To center the camera. Yeah, I think it's probably... So I'm gonna do that now. I'm just gonna pass all the events that I did on the other one to this one. It is kind of annoying because there's so much stuff here already, so it gets kind of confusing. But I think it's the best way, probably. And this is another thing that I have to remove. Yeah, it's just based on the camera mode. I think it was true, so it was false. So this happens when the thing is false, so I have to remove. The other thing I have to do is just study the key bindings from VS Code, because I realized that this is something I have to improve because I don't know very much. And I realized that I think I was watching some other videos. I can just pass Control P, and then I can navigate to the file that I want. And I also realized that I think on the cores from compilers that I can click here and then search on all of the files, I think, for some keyword. I think I can get rid of this thing as well. If this was when I was initially doing everything, and then I changed everything. Of components. Yeah. No, I'll be right back. GSAP, from what I've seen, I read the docs, the documentation, and watched a bunch of videos. And from what I've seen is that it doesn't seem too hard to structure. The hardest part is figuring out how to change the visualization, like to do the animation that in a way that it's gonna have meaning. But I think creating stuff with the GSAP is not gonna be that hard. Using the library, obviously, setting the source code and trying to implement my own version might be hard. It might not be worth it because I think that GSAP is used a lot, so it's not too bad to create a dependency. So the only thing that I didn't see was an example that shows how to change the colors. Usually the examples are about translating stuff or rotating, but then I asked ChatGPT and I got an example. So it pretty much works in a similar way that the little GUI works, where it accepts any object and then you pass the properties of the object that you want to modify, and then it does the functionality for you of selecting the keyframes, like organizing the time in which the stuff is going to change. So you pass the initial value and the thing, but the annoying part is figuring out how to structure like each thing that is going to change. And I think the challenge is going to be to think about like how to change the state of the previous nodes each time, and like structuring the function in such a way that is going to change everything in the best way. So okay, so it seems like everything is done now. I think I'm gonna keep these ones here, and then I'm gonna put the other ones on top. I think this one is, I think, is fine. This is another library that it allows you to add the events. The problem with this library is that it's like holding, not pressing. So, but I think it works fine. So like if you just press, like it works fine. But it's more for holding the thing instead of pressing, like these ones that they had before. Yeah, if I just click, it doesn't do anything, but if you have to press a little bit to go forward. I think these ones is probably not necessary. Yeah, it's not used anywhere, so I'm just gonna remove this stuff. It was from the other thing. I think these are true events that you can use with the camera. I think I was leaving them here so I remember these events here. I think they allow you to... I don't remember really well, but yeah, whatever. Just gonna remove this. These ones are useful. Yeah. So I'm gonna put the other ones on top, and I'm gonna separate them. Maybe custom events is better. Oh, the problem is gonna be that I'm gonna have to move all of this stuff as well to the camera controls. I just realized that. Maybe I leave the drag event here and then I do the other ones on the other one. I think that's better. Because the drag event requires all these different things here. So... And I want to keep as short as possible, I think, if I can. But maybe the drag event's better to leave here. I think this one I did, I added a props. So it's both on the store and on the props, I think, that the drag is determined. But maybe not. Because I think I was thinking like in some situations I'm gonna have different graphs that one should disable the thing by default. So I create a value based on the store, but then I give the option to pass as props to start the value as false on some situations. I think that's what I did, but I don't remember really well. Yeah, maybe I ended up not doing this. Maybe this stuff already does that because it's from the store, so yeah, I think that's what I did. Yeah, so this is gonna set the value as the props. It's gonna be true by default, but the store also has the value. So if I pass as false, I think it's gonna be false. It's gonna start off as false. So yeah, I think I'm gonna move these ones there. And I have to do all this stuff before thinking about the GSAP thing because of the animation. It's gonna be... I think I'm gonna try to see if I can do it just based on the whether or not the function exists. I think that's possible. So just put if animation inside of the use frame. And then I call the function. Yeah, and then I can figure out what arguments I'm gonna pass. So raycaster. Hey. So I do think what I'm gonna do is just try to make the simplest animation that I was talking about, which is just follow the sequence and then change the colors. Then after I do that animation, then it's worth spending some time thinking about how I'm going to structure the arguments that I'm going to receive. I think this matters. It seems that it doesn't matter, but I think it's a better way to do it than just to start creating a bunch of different animations. Because then I'm gonna have to refactor everything later. If I just create a bunch of different animations that I think are gonna be useful. Because I think that the thing is always gonna evolve in ways that I can't predict. So the more complex that it becomes, the higher the chance that I'm gonna have to refactor a bunch of things, and then the more time I spend thinking about it now, and how to structure things, the less likely becomes that I'm gonna have to refactor. Yeah, not sure how to say your nickname, Madur. He's asking me if I can develop an iOS app, and the answer is no. Probably if I spend time, yes, but I think it probably doesn't change much. Obviously, there are going to be changes, but I never spent time learning stuff to create iOS apps. Why should I put this stuff here? I think I'm gonna remove this because you can't put several different events. The thing I was talking about before about merging two functions, like, is not necessary, but I think it would be better. Because the way that it works is every time that you attach an event to... So for example, mouse down, you can have several different functions for the same event, and then you're just gonna call all the functions for that event. So when you click, it triggers the click event and the mouse down, so it calls both functions. But obviously I think it's better to, if you can, put the functions together. So like it would be better, because then I don't have to pass the same arguments. And like a situation where the logic of one function depends on the logic of another one. That's something that I have to think about, and how to structure things. But then obviously I think all of this stuff I can compose like on the other part. So I leave the flexibility for outside of the component, and the component works just as a template. Hmm. Separate. I think it's better to write as GL renderer because it's more specific. So when I think about GL, I think about the context, not the renderer. And I think that the thing that you get from the three JS library is the renderer, which is a class, not the context. Yeah, I think that this is fine. So I think it's fine if I use the edges here again. Or it will be slightly better here because then I have to get the nodes and edges here as well for the other stuff. The thing I'm not sure is that this is gonna load first, then the graph consumer. So this loads before the graph exists, I think. So maybe it is like slightly inefficient. I don't think I can pass this stuff inside of the graph consumer. But maybe I can. So instead of loading here, instead of loading this fragment here, I just pass this one. Yeah, maybe that's better. Because the thing I'm thinking about is that, but I think it's gonna render both of them anyway if I pass that inside. It's not a big problem because like this component initializes the graph, which initializes the nodes and edges, and this one is gonna use the nodes and edges in the way that I'm setting up here for the events, which is not very good. But then obviously it's gonna run everything again once the edges and nodes are updated. But then the question is, if I put this component inside of the other one, if it's only gonna load once. Maybe that's the case, because then by the time this one loads, the other one already has the nodes and edges. So maybe it is better to pass the other. This is not very good, I think, because like the reason why it's structured this way is because I got this one for the other library, and they were doing things differently there, I think. But I'm thinking about like what is the best way to structure things here, to organize everything. And I don't want to do a bunch of stuff if I can avoid it. So I think the easiest thing to do is just to move this one, like the main component there, instead of the other one. It's probably better. And then I'm gonna get it from the store, the graphs and edges, because I think it's better instead of getting from props. But I think maybe it doesn't have any difference. But like when on doubts, I think that the other approach is probably better because there's a higher chance that it's not gonna load more times because it's just loading after the graphs and edges are already built. So I'm gonna remove this from this one. Oh, this is another thing. I think it doesn't matter that much because I'm gonna have to run this thing two times then. I can pass as props, but I think it's not very good as well. I think it's better to leave everything dependent on the store. And I'm gonna create other values now for the store as well. And maybe I'll have to change the name of this stream later. Or I can just leave that, do that later, and then I just focus on the creating animation. I think that's probably better. I think I'm kind of procrastinating on the animation a little bit because it's gonna be annoying to figure out the keyframes. I think I'm gonna use keyframes. So there's the concept of timeline, which allows you to put a bunch of animations together, which is probably what I'm gonna use. And then there's the concept of keyframes as well, which is similar to timeline, but I'm not really sure about the differences between them. So I'm gonna have to study that now, and I'm probably gonna use either one of them to set up the animations for what I'm trying to do, because I'm gonna have to put several different animations together. So I think I'm gonna focus on the animation first, and I think about this stuff later. But now, like, the last thing I'm gonna do is just remove this. This one is being used for the drag event, so I can't remove. But I'm gonna try to see if I can move the components for the camera inside of this one, instead of loading outside. So this one loads first. And then I can remove the fragments there. So let me think about it. Hmm. I don't know why this was being passed. I think I'm gonna try to remove and see if it works. If it doesn't, I'm gonna have to think about this. This is a for ref, which is gonna use a ref from the top. I think I should do with the imperative thing here. So this might be a problem. But I think I wasn't passing anything there. So the question is, because I'm gonna have to remove these things here. Probably. I guess I can leave them there and then just pass props here instead of rests. Or just leave as Rust. I think I'm gonna do that for now, and then I'll think about this later. It's just easier. Constant events. This disabled, I also don't know if it's being used or not. Yeah, so it's probably useful. So I'm gonna leave here. It looks like it's working. So now finally I'm gonna see how can I build the animation. Here I'm also gonna have to do something for the arrows, I think. So let me think about it. I think if animation, just one animation. And then I have to pass a bunch of arguments here. So I think I'll build the function first, and then I'll see what I'm gonna need. So I'm gonna study the documentation now. I also downloaded the source code locally, and already spent some time looking at the source code, but I'm gonna study more because I want to understand how it works. There's both the GSAP and this other one here. I was also thinking about creating another project to study this. Maybe I'll do that now. From what I understand, it creates a class. Like the reason why I'm thinking about creating my own stuff based on this is that I didn't like that much the way that this is structured. And like it's always this question as well, because obviously you don't want to waste a bunch of time. But like the biggest concern that I have is that the more dependencies you put, the more likely it is that something's gonna happen in the future and it's gonna break everything down. And then the question is gonna be how fast will I be able to fix everything again? So if I don't understand the source code very well, then if it breaks down, it's like I'm dependent. So that's why the name is dependency. Like you're dependent on the library. So if they change anything or I don't know, something happens, then it's gonna take me a lot of time and it might break a bunch of things. So this is the reason why I always prefer to, if I can, build this stuff on my own, I think. But there's also the trade-off on time and energy, because then I'm investing a bunch of time on creating my own thing from every single library, and then you can't do anything because everything evolves very fast. So for the color, for example, I used just components from another library, and I didn't worry about too much because I think that if it breaks, it's not like an essential thing from the application. So like I'm gonna have time to figure out another solution. So it's not that big of a deal. And I think that this is probably very similar, but the issue is that this one I think is more important than the other one. So it might be worth it to spend a bunch of time trying to change the source code here. The way that it works is just it sets up a bunch of functions based on this class twin here, and the way that it sets up is kind of confusing. And then it also allows you to, like, the thing is, like, the way that is structured, it reminded me a lot of the way that Pixie is structured, and I didn't like that very much because it seems more complicated than it has to be. But obviously, I don't know. It might be one of those things that it's just, and I think it is one of those things that is just preference. It's not like a fundamental thing, and it's gonna vary because it's just the nature of how things work. So everyone's gonna have their preferences, and then there's gonna be a bunch of differences. But for the way that I think, it's kind of like writing curly braces like this. I just hate it. It's not my preference at all. I think it looks more confusing, but it doesn't matter, obviously, for the code itself. It's just a preference thing. So it seems like, it feels that the way that this was structured is not the way that I like things should be. But here is very complicated as well to understand. But I think that from what I've seen, this is the class that controls is gonna handle everything on the animation. And it changes the values. So I have to understand how it does that. But I think first I'm gonna create something and then I'll go to the source code. I think it's a better thing. Because then I'm gonna know what to look for when I'm studying the source code. To try to replicate or... I have to remember how to... Because it's more complicated to create the functions that get the meshes. I think I'm gonna create a bunch of functions here that just get all the meshes into their separate values. Yeah, well, let me focus on this one first. So, yeah, I have to do it with this one instead. I just realized that. I was talking about this before. Hmm. Maybe it doesn't make sense to... I think it's better to just make it based on the props. But let me think. I guess the question is whether or not there's gonna be a situation that happens that, like, for based on some other configuration, we would like to change the animation. I think it's gonna be similar to the drag event thing. That is, I'm gonna have both the props and the thing here. So I think I'm gonna do it like that. So I'm just gonna copy what I did here for the drag events. And I'm gonna do the same thing on this one, but for the other thing. I have to spend more time thinking about if this makes sense or not. Because the other one, I'm passing a flag, a boolean variable from props, and then I'm going to setting that with a variable. It doesn't make sense to do this, or should I just put this stuff inside of the use frame? I think it does make sense to do like this, and then I put the... Yeah, I'm gonna leave it like this, and it's gonna be on by default. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I pass as false, but then like the question is the types, because I'm passing as a function. So like I can just put the animation equals false here, but then it's gonna be... I don't think that's very good, because I'm expecting to receive a function. So if the default is a boolean, I think it's not very good. Because the thing that I'm thinking about is that there might be a situation where I want to do the same thing with the drag, that it just disables the animation. I think that is the case, probably. Oh yeah, it has to be the case, because I'm gonna have the playback. So, hmm. Maybe this one it doesn't make sense. Like I'm gonna make it based on the pause. So I just change the name but keep the thing the same way. That's. But I have to spend some time thinking about this now. I'll be right back. I think what I have to do is just put I'm gonna create only one variable, and it's not gonna be is animation active. It's gonna be the play variable. So play animation, then the pause is gonna be based on the play animation. So I'm gonna start as false, but for now I'm gonna start as true. And then like it starts the animation paused, and then I put the logic of the components that's gonna select the thing to be dependent on this variable. The other thing I was thinking about is that for a moment I thought that would be a problem, because for the configuration I'm gonna need the values as well. So, and I can't do the configuration component inside of these other components because these are inside of React Fiber. So it doesn't accept HTML elements unless you use the other library, which I don't want to use. But then I realized that it is not a problem because I'm still gonna create the thing inside of this provider here, which is the same logic that I'm using on this one. So even though it uses a bunch of values of the graph, it's not a problem because they are initialized as false, but then when it updates the store, when it creates the graph, it's gonna update the values of the component anyway, so it's not a big deal, I think. Yeah, I think it's just gonna be the same logic as I did this one, and I create another component here, which is gonna be a playback. And then from that component, I get the values from the store that are gonna change, which are gonna be these values here. And I just create a variable that's gonna determine whether or not this is gonna run. So because this is inside of the thing, I remember that there is an update thing as well. Like the complication is like how to structure the functions. That's very hard to think about, because I have to think about the template that is gonna work for everything, and it's very hard. I'm gonna leave like as true for now, and then I'll switch this to false once I figure this out. Yes, I think I'm gonna remove this thing here. It just starts as pause, so yeah, let me think now. Yeah, so now I think I can finally start structuring this function. So let me think about it. So I think I'm gonna need the nodes. Do I need the nodes or the meshes? I think the nodes make more sense. I think I'm gonna have to pass the nodes anyway for all of them. The nodes and the meshes. Like the meshes make more sense because of the raycaster, but the nodes makes more sense. The node object that I'm using makes more sense because it's a bridge between the two. So it's gonna, like, it's more flexible because it is for the React part, and the meshes are only related to the visualization. So like I can create the attributes on the inside of the meshes that link them together, and maybe for the labels I'm gonna have to do that. But I think it's better to do the logic of the functions for the visualizations based on the node object instead of the meshes. Yeah, but the thing is, like, the selection is gonna be dependent on the mesh. So it's better. I can't use the mesh ID because it's different, so I have to create a new variable inside of the mesh that links them. Maybe it is better. Like I just create one. I think I'm gonna have to do that anyway. That's the thing. But the thing is, I'm gonna change the attributes on the node. I need the node and the edges anyway, I think. Because the node object is the one that contains the color, and then as the mesh changes, the node color is still gonna be the same. So like there's gonna be a default color and a new color on the node object, and then I'm gonna swap between the two, and those attributes are not gonna change on the node, they change on the mesh. So it's better to do the logic based on the nodes, and then it updates the mesh. So I think it makes more sense to pass. I have to pass both. I think I need to create. Maybe I changed my mind a lot. I don't remember really well. Yeah, I think I need to create another thing here. The thing that is tricky about this is that's like, what if I want multiple different colors? Like if I want an arbitrary number of colors, it becomes more complicated because then I can't just initialize them here. So I think it's probably better to not create them here and just make it so that it breaks if it doesn't have the thing. So let me think about this. I can also add inside of these functions the property. So let's say, for example, I have a situation where I want to animate the colors of the nodes for 3 different colors. So like in that way, I could just add the colors here, I think. But then the problem is that they're going to be, it's not very good because they're going to be updated each time. Ideally, you only add once and then you swap between them. But if it's an arbitrary number of colors, I can't just initialize on the build graph there. So what is the best way? I think the best way is probably inside of the logic of the function, because it's gonna change all the time, and I think it doesn't make sense to pass an array, then loop over the array, because then it's gonna create a bunch of complications everywhere, I think. I guess I'll think about this stuff later. I'm just gonna pass the nodes and edges. Oh, I also need the node map, because the node map is useful when I'm looping over the edge and I want to get the nodes. And I think I need to loop over both edges and nodes each time. I think like this is the challenge. It's not that hard to create a function, I think. The hardest part is thinking about how to optimize for each case. That's the problem. Because I want to avoid doing a bunch of loops, because then the animation is gonna be slow. So, like, the thing that is annoying me the most is this stuff about the nodes and edges. Like, maybe it makes sense to create an adjacency list on the store, and then I use the adjacency list. Like, I think with the adjacency list, like, the trade-off is that it's gonna be, I'm gonna be able to, ideally I would have a situation where I can update the node and the edge on the same loop each time, so I don't have to loop over the node. I guess this is the problem. I have to think about this now, because if I'm updating sequentially, it doesn't make sense. Like, it's too inefficient to loop through all the nodes, then decide which one I want to put the color, and then loop through all the edges again, and then it's like very not gonna be good. So the question is, how can I select nodes and edges? Like, change the color of nodes and edge right after. Instead of looping through all the nodes, changing the color, then looping through all the edges. It's gonna be sequential. So what I'm trying to do is just color each node at each time, as if it's firing a neuron in the brain. That's the kind of thing that I wanna achieve, so that it shows highlights the execution of the graph, the IDs one by one. So I guess I have to see in the documentation. The other question is whether or not to initialize this here or to pass as an argument. Because I think that's, you can use a context from this, and then you use the context to remove. So maybe I initialize this outside and then I pass as an argument. I pass the function that I create here as an argument to the GSAP thing outside. Or GSAP, not JSAP. Okay, this is the questions. I guess I just passed the function. I'm gonna use the, so I'm gonna use this stuff on the component itself, not here, because I'm just gonna create the context. I think that's probably the best way to do it. And then I just pass the function inside. Yeah, I think I initialize as a function. And the problem is, like, I'm gonna use inside of the use frame, that's the issue. So like, I can't use the use layout effect to create inside because then it's outside of the scope of the use frame. And I think creating the context inside of the use frame is not good. So probably use callback. Yeah, I think I have to use the use callback, then initialize the thing inside of the use callback. Yeah, this is a problem, I think. So what I'm thinking about is like initializing this outside, then I wrap this stuff inside of the user callback, then I return this context here on the use callback. But the issue with that is that it's gonna call the function immediately, and that's not what I want, because I want to use it inside of the use frame. It's kind of annoying. And I think that's, maybe I can search for this. I think I'm gonna ask ChatGPT. Because the thing is, on the examples, I think that they're not gonna show with 3JS. I think the examples that I've seen from 3JS, they use GSAP, don't show as well how to do this. But I think I'm gonna search for the examples again and try to see. If there's anything that is similar. Yeah, maybe I don't do it with the context for now. Just do it the simplest way and think about this later. The question is if I don't use the context, if it's gonna have a memory leak. Or maybe the best way is just to try to make it work and see what happens. So I use the use callback and then, yeah, this is what I was thinking. The question is whether or not you put this stuff on the store or use the state. I think it makes more sense to make it based on the store. Yeah, I think that's because then I'm gonna be able to change. based on the store. So I create this value based on the store. This is the timeline. Then I use the use callback, and then I put this inside of the. I call this inside of the use frame. There's so much to think about. Maybe this one is a better one. And the question would be what is the scope? Because I'm not animating like a div element or HTML element. So the issue is that it doesn't make sense to pass. I think it doesn't make sense to pass like nodes, edges, and everything. That's the problem. So if I do like a value based on the store, I think I need to read about the context again to understand more how it works. So I think it's pretty simple. Like you pass the stuff that you want to animate, and you pass the object with the attribute that you want to change. Provides shoe incredibly useful. Scopes, selectors, more quickly animation cleaner. As a ref into context to specify a scope. All selector stacks. Like maybe I can create a use ref that doesn't bind to anything. just use ref hook. Maybe I bind a use ref hook to the value of the store, to one value of the store, and then I pass that value, and then I just use the hook there that they provided. But then I pass the function instead. But if I pass the function, maybe that's a good idea, because then I can initialize here and then I just pass the function here. But I think it makes more sense to have the use callback instead of the use memo. But maybe not. Yeah, because the tricky thing is that I don't want the animation to run when I initialize the context. I want to run only when the thing here. But and so what's the question that I'm trying to clarify? I think is whether or not, like, how does the running work? Not sure if that's the right way to put it. So let me think. I don't know. Like, based on this here, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the thing that I'm trying to do, I think. I don't understand, like, because I think that this is attaching to the tree elements, so it selects the top component based on the tree elements. But I'm not using the tree elements, I'm using the tree.js, so this is why it's kind of confusing to think about, because I don't know what to pass here. And the thing is, I don't want to obviously do like this, because then I'm gonna have to change the position of the camera controls component. Or either that, or I'm gonna have to create another stuff to somehow get the ref of the parent one, because then, like, I would need to get the ref that encapsulates everything. Encapsulates the nodes and edges. Maybe it's better to just look at the examples of that's use Tree.js to see how they do it. You want to search on CodePen and Code Sandbox. I don't remember the name. I'm gonna search for examples, and then I'm gonna do it based on the examples, I think. It's kind of confusing, because most of the examples are for DOM elements, which is understandable. If I can't find anything, I'm just gonna try to do stuff and see what happens. I think I'm gonna try without the context first, then I'll think about it later. Or maybe I'll try, the first thing that I'm gonna try is just the use callback. So I'll create here, or it has to be after everything. Yeah, let me think. So here I would return the GSAP thing, and then I pass the function, like return GSAP of context, and I pass animation. The problem is the scope that I don't know, but I can create a ref inside of this one and just pass the current ref there. And then I make the ref dependent on the value from the store. But the thing that I don't understand, I guess what I have to clarify is how the scope relates to the animation. How is it gonna change the animation? That's the question that I have to clarify. And obviously I think it's gonna be related. So if I just pass a Boolean value, I think it's not gonna work. Because I think the scope is gonna determine like what kind of things are gonna change. It's just the scope, as the name says. So I think this is the biggest problem. But if I don't do it like this, then I can just use the... I could just pass the GSAP thing to the animation function, like GSAP animation, or animation and GSAP. And then I do the whatever I need to do. Maybe initialize here. Yeah, let me think about this. Yeah, the difference is if I use the context, I pass the function as an argument to the context. And if I don't use the context, I pass the GSAP to the function. And then I do things with the thing. And then here you would have the... Actually is like this. Like so yeah, maybe it's better. I'm just gonna pass as an argument and then I see if I can do stuff. Then I will think about this later. Actually, I don't need to pass here. Yeah, but if I don't pass, I guess it doesn't matter. I'm forgetting about the... And the question is whether or not I need to pass here, or I can just pass here. Because this is gonna come from this one. So the only difference is that like here is passing by proxy through this one. If I do it like this, then it passes as proxy. If I just remove, then it passes like from the global thing here. I think I'm gonna leave it like this for now. I'm gonna try to. If I wasn't streaming, I was gonna think about this like more. But since I'm streaming, I think I'm gonna try to implement like the simplest thing first. So I'm gonna see like how to create the timeline. Then from with this timeline, here like I'm gonna loop over the nodes, and then here I'm just gonna pass the properties that I want. Maybe I'll get the meshes first, and then obviously I'm gonna change this our sphere meshes. So later I just create on the application, and then I memorize the values, and then I pass the memorized values to this. It's gonna be nodes map, nodes, node group, nodes. I think on the node itself I have the. But maybe it's better to access through this. And then I loop over the meshes instead, and then for each mesh I change the color. So I have to think about. I think this is the first thing that I have to think now, is how to connect the nodes and edges in a way that allows me to update the one node and then the edge without having to do 2 different loops. So I need to figure out the data structure that is probably going to be a adjacency list. It's going to map the nodes with the edges that it has, and then it figures out what's the next node. So maybe I do a loop here for I loop. Not sure what the name of the loop is, but like a loop over the node length, and then I get based on the index, I get the next one on the list. And then based on that, I see like what is gonna be the edge that connects them. So I need a structure that maps the node ID with the edges that it has. So probably I'm gonna create this here, but I'll be right back. I think I figured out what I need. So I need an algorithm that, based on 2 different nodes, gets the edges at the edge that connects them. So I need to remember what the edges have. They have the ID of the source and the target, and what else? The line graphics. And it's a list, so I'm trying to think like, how can I create a data structure that is gonna make it as easy as possible to, based on 2 different nodes, to get the edge that for the node. So let me think, how can I do this? Obviously I want to do it in the easiest way possible. So the first thing that comes to my mind is just an asset object that has like one key is one node ID, the other key is the other node ID, and then the value is the edge. Maybe that's the best. Not really sure. Is it the idea, like for now I'm gonna do it inside of the function, but then I'm gonna move this all of this stuff that I'm doing here to outside of the function, so I only run it once, and then it's gonna be part of the graph store. And then I'm gonna pass as an argument to this function. I think that's probably the best data structure for doing the animations, because everything that I'm gonna do is gonna depend on these things here. And then for the caching, I just do inside of the function. So like I have to keep track of the previous things that were animated, but maybe in other situations I need like. But I think the caching is gonna be like specific to each function that I have. So like obviously I want to change the values on the, so in one timeline, the first timeline I changed the edge, the color and the edge of one node. Then I cache them on an object, maybe outside of the function, maybe inside. Then I change, I guess this is the question, is like how is it gonna structure things. I think that the way that it works is you set everything up first, which is the way that makes more sense in my mind. So you set everything that's gonna happen based on these functions of the, like create a timeline, then set everything that happens, then after you set everything, then it actually runs the animation at a different point, I think. Like it doesn't run as you declare, which makes more sense to me. So if that's the case, then I can just cache, like create a cache or a stack, something like that inside of the function. Then based on that, I determine, like on the second point of the timeline, I change the color of the second node and the edge of the second node, and then I revert back to the previous color, the previous node that was highlighted. That's what I want to achieve. And then obviously I need to do that in a way that I don't have to repeat everything, so it's probably going to be a loop, and the data structure is the thing that is going to determine how the thing is updated. And there's like a billion ideas of things, like, so just realize that the main components are going to be this data structure you're looping over to create the animation, and the other one is the data structure that you're using to cache this stuff. And I think the combination of those things are going to be the like the core essence of any animation that I'm gonna have. Yeah, let me think about this. I think these keyframes work. Like, it's just replacing these values with the arrays. So this is what's gonna happen sequentially there. I think that's what it's doing. So instead of writing the X, you just put these values. The question is whether or not, like, how does it work? How do you determine if, like, because here is updating the X and the Y. So is it gonna update the X and the Y here, or how does that work? Yeah, maybe the keyframes are not very good for what I'm trying to do. Maybe it is, but I think like it's more, at least from what I'm thinking about now, the timeline is more like generic, and the keyframes is if you want to specify what's gonna happen for each specific thing. From my case, so I think that's like it's probably better to start with the timeline first and move to keyframes later. The other thing I was thinking about, and this is the reason why I opened this page, that I remember this was the first page that helped me build the thing, like the first version of the graph. And I remember this because this one has the animation of the, like these parts here that are moving. And what I was thinking about is, and this is another thing that I want to research later as well, on how to, for this I'm going to use for the edges I'm going to use this example, but like how to change the color in the gradient instead of changing the color for the whole edge. So I would do it like this, so it gives more of the notion that like it's flowing through the thing. And the other thing is how to make the nodes as a gradient instead of a single color. But the way that they do it here is kind of problematic, so I'm gonna have to think about if there's another way, because they created another edge on top of the other one, and then they just change the values of one of the edges based on the use frame, I think. So it's like 2 different lines built on top of each other. But then obviously it's like a lot worse, because then I'm gonna have to update everything. I think it's gonna become a lot slower. And I have to see if this is gonna be a problem here, because it looks like every time that I'm updating the thing, it's complaining. But I think that this is just because of it's because I'm using use callback probably. And when you hot reload, it doesn't update the state of the application. So I think it's something to do with the use callback. Because then, like when you save, it hot reloads, and then it doesn't pass it doesn't update the use callback, but it's still calling the function. So it doesn't update this function here. So it's just calling the function without arguments. And then it complains. I think that's what's happening. But I'm not really sure if that's problematic or not. This is another thing that's kind of annoying. That's I have to convert to hex because 3GS uses RGB colors, and the reason why I'm using hex is because of the components for the color that I'm using, like a custom component, and the RGB one is that they have is it doesn't work with the input that I have there for the customization. So like this thing here, like this is in hex. If I want to use the RGB one, it's gonna be like uglier here. So this forces me to use this thing here. Yeah, so now let me think. So what I have to do is figure out how to combine them. Maybe I should have done this before I did this, because I think this is gonna change the way that I'm doing this thing. How can I do this? Let me think. The problem if I loop over the edges is that I want to get sequentially. But maybe that's what I have to do, like loop over the edges and then I use the node map to get each node. And then I just filter later based on the IDs. Or not filter, reduce, or maybe map. Or sort, and then I pass the... I sort based on the IDs. I don't like using sort because I think that you can... It's not actually sorting things, it converts things into a string and then sorts based on the string format, something like that, so I don't think it's very reliable. Like you might not do what you expect it to do. So let me think about the easiest way to do this. So if I had a dictionary that maps the node ID to the edge, I think this like is not worth thinking about something that's gonna work for everything, because it's gonna be very specific to each thing that I wanna do. And I think each kind of animation that I wanna do is gonna be its own function, and I'm gonna store them on these files so I can reuse the different patterns, but there are gonna be several different patterns. So I think it's not worth trying to make something that is gonna work for every single pattern. So I think just about creating the structure that is gonna work for this specific case, which I think is gonna be, I can create an object that has the IDs, node IDs that map to the edge that I wanna highlight for each one. I think that's what I have to do. So yeah, this is probably the simplest thing. So I loop over the edges here, and then I just get the from node, and I create another structure here. Let me think. And the problem is that I don't wanna. Yeah, so I guess I don't need the from node. And then I loop over the nodes, and I loop over the I loop over the nodes, and then I check to see the edge. So I highlight the. So now the question is how I'm gonna do the timeline thing. It's just timeline. Not sure. And then I have to change the color. Or actually I need to loop over the meshes. And this goes back to the problem that I was talking about, that I can't loop over the edges, the meshes, because they don't have the ID. So either I create an ID on the mesh and then I loop over the mesh, or I loop over the. So I guess this is probably useless then. I think it's better to just loop over the nodes, and then I just put the thing here. I guess this is another question, is whether or not true. I'm gonna do the thing that I was talking about of creating the cache here. So what data structure should I create here, or should I create more than one? Maybe I think it's better like this one, so it just maps through this one. I guess this is the problem though, so I'm gonna do this. No, I think that makes sense actually. But it, actually, maybe not. Or maybe I think this works. So I just create like 1 true for each time that it loops. For both the edge and the node. And then after I create, I just put them here. Maybe a stack makes more sense. I think a stack makes more sense. So I initialize them with the problem is I don't know, like I don't want to think about whether or not it's gonna be the same node. Because then I would have to manually put this stuff here, like would put node 0 and then like would put inside of here, and then I would pop from the stack instead of doing like this. The other thing I can do is just create a variable, a flag variable to indicate that's the first one. And if it is the first one, I use it like this. Otherwise, I just pop from the stack. I think I'll think about this later. I'm gonna focus on creating the simplest animation possible, then I think about this stuff off stream. Yeah, so the question is how can I'm just gonna highlight each one. I'm not gonna worry about changing the color of the previous one. So I guess the only thing I have to do is just change the value there. Hmm. Oh, I guess I'm passing the color instead of passing the mesh. Maybe I should pass the mesh. No, but then, yeah, I think if I pass the mesh and the thing automatically changes. Oh, here's passing the color. Mm. Oh, this one worked. But it's only doing twice. Oh, this is the problem. Oh no, no, it's working. So I guess it's changing based on the duration there. So it is working. Nice. But it's not working on the order because I think it's not looping based on the LED. But I think that's good enough. So it's actually a lot. It's actually as easy as I expected it to be. But the hard part is gonna be figuring out the logic, like on how to animate. So I think regardless, this is probably a good data structure to have. I think this one here. So what I'm gonna do is just do the same thing that I did for the node map for this one. Just gonna use the use memo and I'm gonna initialize this in the beginning. I think this is probably the most useful for animations because like that's the only thing that matters is just selecting the nodes that I want to animate and then the edges, if I want to animate the edges that are associated with the nodes. The only difference is going to be if I want to like highlight multiple different edges and then I would use an array instead of mapping to the one edge. So I initialize as an array and then I push to the array. Maybe that one is better than this one. And then you would add an additional work. I think it's not worth it to do like both of them probably. It's better to do one of them and then do the additional work of getting the first edge. Because then you would have to filter the array to get the edge that you want to highlight if you just want to highlight one. The thing is, I'm not really sure if I'm doing the right way as well, because maybe I have to initialize this outside of the use frame and then I just pass the, like there's a function to update, but here is doing instead of the use frame, so. I guess this is the thing, is because I'm like creating the animation for all nodes every time, but maybe that's the way that it is, because the other ones are in a similar, they work in a similar way, where you have to update everything each time on each cycle of the use frame. But it's kind of weird because if you think about it, like if it's gonna animate just one, if it sets everything before, then it shouldn't have to update each time. I think like it shouldn't have to initialize the timeline each time, I think. So I guess I'm gonna search for this as well. this second way makes more sense to me intuitively, but I think it might work the other way. So, like, you create the timeline once, and then based on the clock, you figure out, or based on a step or something, a variable, you figure out what part of the timeline you're at, and then you only run that part for the use frame cycle. I think that, like, it seems a lot more efficient, but because this way that I'm doing, it just initializes everything each time, and it feels like it's like doing work that's not necessary. But maybe that's the way that they structured everything. So, it looks like I've been here for 3 hours already. So I think I'm gonna stop soon. I think I'm gonna spend some time just reading this code, and then I'm gonna stop. But what I'm gonna do off stream is just I'm gonna clean this up, and I have to think about this. I think it makes sense. Like, after I clean this up, it just makes sense to start working on the interpreter part. I'm gonna... Maybe I won't stream for some time, and then after I finish reviewing this course, then I'm going to try to start working on the interpreter. And I have to decide which language... I'm going back and forth on whether or not to try to do it everything in C, because I don't have experience in C, or try to build it on JavaScript or Python, like the actual interpreter itself. And the reason why I'm thinking that it might be better to do it in C is because C is more fundamental language, and if I want in the future to create more compilers for other languages, it might be better to have C, because then on C it might be easier to branch, like to reuse all the stuff that I built for the other languages. But in one way, I think it doesn't matter, because, and this is another thing that was conflicting as well when I was building this Scotty draw here, because it is kind of confusing. But like, I think somewhere along the way I got it twisted, where like for building the parser itself and the interpreter, you don't need to understand where the things come from. Obviously, it's better to understand where they come from, and this is why I'm going to study assembly as well, but more to try to understand more, clarify more how how objects are created, for example, from binary code, which I think is based on hash functions and how they work actually in memory. But for building the parser and the lexer, you don't need this stuff. You just, and this goes back to which language to choose, because you can create all, like, from any language you can create the logic that is gonna parse this stuff in the way that you want. So you can create can't create an interpreter or compiler using Python that is gonna compile C or any other language, I think. As long as you can pattern match the strings and then decide how we're gonna build the lexers and the tokens, and then the abstract syntax tree based on that. You can decide any language you want. So for that reason, I think it might be better to just do it in Python, because Python is a lot easier to think about the stuff. You don't need to think about the pointers and memory and all of that stuff. But the downside is that it will be a lot slower. But I think time is not very important for what I'm trying to do, because like the most important thing is optimizing the visualization itself and the structure of the visualization. But I think for scaling, is not the speed doesn't matter that much, because there's gonna be, like, it's probably gonna follow the Pareto distribution, where there's gonna be the most gravitational force on libraries that are already popular. And the reason why I think is like that, maybe it changes with AI though, but I think that the process is gonna be the same, because it's dependent on the fundamental structure, like of the laws of physics. It's just gravitational force. So even with AI might amplify how much code changes, but there's gonna be fundamental structures that are 80% is probably gonna be very stable. So the speed doesn't matter for updating, because as long as you capture the 80% that are fundamental, the only thing that matters is optimizing the way that different ways you can structure the visualization with the parser to extract meaning from the code. I think that's the most important. So it might be better to choose Python for that reason. It's just a lot easier to develop, and the speed doesn't matter that much. But maybe I'm wrong, and maybe the speed matters a lot. So I think it doesn't make sense. I think I'm probably gonna do it with Python because the speed I think would only matter if I was actually trying to compile or interpret the thing. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I think the only part that I'm trying to do is up until the parser part, which is just extracting, like, getting the structure of the code. And so I think upstream I'm gonna structure this here outside. I'm gonna think about everything that I need for the animations, and I think after I figure that out, like after I structure this couple of things here, I'm not gonna think about everything that can happen. I think it's just better to start trying to build the graphs, because only by building the graphs and building the parser and interpreter, I'm gonna be able to think about different ways to visualize. Like, I have to structure the other thing first, and then it's gonna, which is kind of annoying because I would like to have the functions set up so I don't have to think about that anymore, but I think that is just like the nature of the thing. I'm gonna have to think about it. But I think it's better to at least try to see like how to use keyframes and timelines, like try to do a little bit more of these animations to see what potential ways I'm gonna have to structure the data so that I can capture things that I want to capture, which are gonna be probably based on the timeline and the keyframe. And then once I have a general idea, then I know like what are gonna be the fundamental data structures. Then I set up the data structures as use memo in the camera controls and pass them as props to this one. Then after I have all of that set up, then I can go back. Maybe I'll focus on the arrows, and then once I have the arrows figure out, I'll go back to start studying the interpreters. I think that what I'm gonna do as well is probably study the source code. I'm contemplating whether or not it's worth it to build. I already downloaded some stuff for assembly, so like try to build at least some stuff on assembly so I can get a better idea of like how things work on the low level. Because I already know assembly and machine code, but I don't have experience on the context of building something. So I think doing that's gonna make it like understand more how the high level instructions become calculations on the registers. This is what I want to clarify more. But I think what I'm gonna do is probably look at the source code of the V8 engine, which is a JavaScript engine. Maybe this is another reason why I should use C instead of using Python, because this is built with C++, so maybe like I can potentially reuse a bunch of code that they use here to parse JavaScript, and then it would be easier if I'm using C or C++. If I do use C or C++ though, I'm gonna spend some time studying them as well. Again, like even though I already know a bunch of stuff, like I don't have experience building, so with these languages, so I think it's gonna be harder. And so this is all the stuff that I have to do before. The arrows, I think, is just the arrows is kind of like the easiest one. It's probably just updating here like doing the same thing that I did here for the rotation, and then updating on the physics engines the position. I remember it's kind of annoying based on the curve though. I'm gonna focus on. I think I'm just gonna build like a simple. And the thing is that it's not hard actually. It's very easy. So probably I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna build anything more here. I'm just gonna structure this stuff here outside, and then I'll focus on the other stuff. Then I'll go back to this later. But I think it will be nice to spend some time studying the source code here, so I make sure I really understand what's going on here. In case something breaks in the future, it's gonna be easier to know. Or not even in case something breaks, in case I wanna do some animation that is outside of the way that they do it here. But I think it's kind of hard to... It's probably not... Because the animation is always going to be the same thing. It's always going to be like changing an object based on some certain time. So I think it doesn't change. Like there isn't a situation that I would require something that they don't have here. So I think it makes more sense to use their library instead of trying to create my own. And then just study the source code a little bit so I understand, but then move on and focus on the other stuff. Oh, the other thing I forgot, I have to do the components. So maybe I'll do that first. I have to do the HTML. I think I'm gonna do that now. I'm just gonna set up the components and then I'm gonna think about it later. But I'm gonna do it the same way that I did the other one. The question is whether or not I create another file for this. Maybe not. I think I'm gonna leave it like here. I think I'll create another folder here inside. Playback. I think it's just gonna be the same name. I wanna think about. And it's gonna be similar to this one. Just copy here. But I think for this one I'm not gonna do the same logic because I'll have to think. But it's just gonna be because on the other one I'm switching the ones that show based on the input here, the current options. So obviously this one is not necessary because it's just simple. And then obviously I'm gonna change the whole style as well. But I'll think about this later. I think I'm gonna stop here. So what I'm gonna do is just create a component that works kind of like a video playback, and then based on the component I'm gonna change values of the store, the playback store, and then based on those values I'm gonna... This is another thing that I have to figure out, just realize this now. So I'm probably gonna pass here as an argument. Instead of using duration, I use a value of the store here. So like interval or something like that, or time interval. Then this value is based on the store that I create there. And I pass here. And the colors as well. No, the colors I think is gonna be because they're gonna change for each function that I do, so it's not gonna be based on the store, it's gonna be based on the functionality for each case. Yeah, I think that the time interval is the only thing. And then I think keyframes are probably gonna be the thing that I have to use to select like how to step. I think on the documentation they have stuff about this. Like if I want to step through, so go back and forth. But not in a continuous way, just like as you're stepping over a function. I think that's gonna be very useful as well. And the idea I have with this, obviously there's like a billion things you can do, but I think it's gonna be very nice to like highlight different patterns that happen when you execute a script, or like how different data is gonna change, and then I can put the color that represents like in real life what would happen, like red for representing hot and blue for representing cold. That's kind of the idea that I have. But I think I'm gonna stop here. I'm not really sure when I'm gonna come back, but I'm gonna continue to do this stuff. And the thing that I talk about. I think once I'm done reviewing the cores and watching all these videos here, like studying assembly, I'm gonna decide what thing I'm gonna do later, and then I'm gonna try to stream more frequently from that point. Because right now I don't want to stream frequently because I'm just watching all these videos. So I'm trying to speed run like all of them and to learn as much like on the surface level as possible. Then once I have a decent understanding, I start like trying to put everything in practice more, and then I think it's worth, when the time comes, I stream more frequently. But I'm not really sure how long it's gonna take. Maybe 1 or 2 days, hopefully. And then all this stuff's gonna be done. So yeah, see you next time.